For you guys. We have an incredible guest here today. Just a treat to talk to this guy. He's an expert in his field. Dr. Doug Polster. He's a PhD and he works at the Division of Neuroscience, Department of Neuroscience at UCLA as a clinical instructor. He is a performance psychologist. And for those of you who don't know what that is, you're going to find out. And I can't wait to dive into this. But, you know, I feel like I wish I had a performance psychologist ever since I started my job as a physician. It would have been like really helpful. And now I'm finally meeting you, just way too into this, but I'm glad to have met you. Can't wait to hear what you're doing and some of the new technology you're just telling me about that you're developing. That's going to be going to be a game changer. I can't wait to hear about that. And I'm also here with Kevin, co-founder of Next Health and president of Next Health, and he has a ton of questions as well. So why don't we just launch into it and find out a little bit more about you. So
for sure.
First question first. Tell us what a performance psychologist is and what you do and what kind of people you see and what you're doing with them.
So I think the easiest explanation, which probably would resonate with most people, is we all, no matter what our pursuit is, when we're trying to perform, whether it's at work, whether it's athletically, or if you're a kid or a student and in school, is we have mental obstacles to success. We all have that. You don't have to have a disorder to have a mental obstacle to success. And oftentimes that deals with the way we think. So I like to tell my clients that we all have a guy in our shoulder that says, you stink, you can't do it, don't try, what if we fail? How could I cope if I failed? And that holds us back from really doing the good work that we could do and fulfill our potential. So the simplest answer is I help turn the volume down on that guy. All right, how do we shut him up? Or how do we learn to live with him knowing that he's probably going to be there and he's probably going to chirp up when we don't want him to? So that's pretty much the simplest answer of
that's a great answer.
How I do what I do rather. And the clientele that I work with are mostly high achieving individuals that fall into kind of two buckets. Sometimes I have high achievers that have kind of hit a wall and are now stuck in the mud. And again, there's a huge mental component to that in terms of how we think. We start to remove ourselves from performance situations and that kind of thing. But more often than not, my patients or my clients fall into a different bucket, which a lot of psychologists don't have too much experience with. And that's the bucket of I'm performing just fine, right? I'm doing well. I'm number one in sales. I'm number one in the business. And so the challenge then becomes, how do I maintain peak performance? Maybe even potentially enhance it. And oftentimes in that bucket, it's not fear of performance that my clients struggle with. It's fear of what happens if I can't maintain this performance. And that becomes a different mental obstacle. So that one's definitely challenging to work with, but that's really, really I butter my bread.
It does go up another level once you're up there, right?
Yeah. If you take somebody who's not leaving their house because they're super anxious of any kind of social interaction, you can make a lot of gains with that because there's a ton of room for improvement. If you have somebody that's at the peak of their game, there's much more small tinkerings that we have to do, and it can be harder to see improvement.
Right, the stakes are higher. When you're already at the top, where do you go?
And that's pretty much the scariest elephant in the room that we have to confront is now what?
Yeah, and expectations. People expect you to stay at the top, right?
Yep.
And it's the fear of losing that or not living up to that I think probably disables some people every once in a while.
Yeah. And that's what I've had a lot of my clients describe. And a lot of my clients have been to other psychologists before. And this is not to poo-poo on any other psychologist whatsoever, because psychology is all about fit. And oftentimes they've been to a psychologist before and they haven't quite been heard that no, like I'm doing well, like I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with me. Right. But it's that opposite thing. But what if I can't maintain? What if I can't continue this? Then what happens? And that ends up causing distress. It can wreak havoc on our health. We can have, this internal fight or flight stress system is just always going. I don't know. You guys work on that here, right? Yeah. Calming that down. So I work on calming that down from the mental side.
Right. So that's a really great analogy that you just gave. So you're trying to silence the little guy on your shoulder that's telling you can't do it, which is very different than kind of like the motivational speakers that's the other guy on the shoulder. That's like rah, rah, like Tony Robbins type,
Right.
Yeah. But you're right. Like there's never really focus put on the other aspect of it, or I feel very little focus put on the other aspect of that. Do you find that a lot of people, athletes, people that come to you don't really understand that that's what's really holding them back? Or do you find that, people are coming to you sometimes to look for them to push them versus just trying to get rid of their obstacles? Or
So I think the biggest challenge that I see with my clientele is the advice that they have been given, whether by a psychologist, if they've seen one, most times they haven't, by a mental skills coach, and that's kind of a gray area, or by a coach or a family member or a friend, is essentially under the bucket of just think positively.
yes,
Right?
exactly.
Rah, positively think your way through it. And that doesn't work. And we've actually realized that on the scientific side over the last 10, 15 years, traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, which is where a lot of what I do is based in, was about identifying your thoughts and recognizing what's irrational, right? What's not based in reality, and changing that thought and manipulating it. But with our peak performers, those thoughts are likely pretty rational and pretty true. So then what do you do, right? If you can't think your way out of it, what do you do? And then it becomes much more of an acceptance that guy on our shoulder is going to be there. We can't fight him off. And the more we fight him off, the more stress we get that he won't leave. And when he doesn't leave, we get more angry. And then that starts to interfere with our performance.
Exactly.
So rather than thinking positively way through it, and when I describe this to my clients, you can kind of see the light go off like, yeah, I've tried to think positively and that doesn't work. And it's because you're trying to convince your brain that something is true that's not.
Right.
And so it becomes more of acceptance of what are our true realities and then how do we function better within them.
Interesting.
When you have a peak performer, do you feel that they have as loud of a voice as your, more of your average person? Like, are they struggling also with the dichotomy of that person telling them they're not good enough, they can't do it? Are they also dealing with that? Or have they at that point figured out how to turn it down, or is it less prevalent than the others?
So most people have figured out how to turn it down. And actually the first assignment I give my peak performance clients is to go watch Ricky Bobby, The Ballad of Talladega Nights. That's the first homework assignment I give them.
I'm going to watch that tonight.
But watch it through the eyes of a psychologist.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So Ricky Bobby has the if you're not first, you're last mentality. Right. And so basically he shut up the guy on his shoulder that said, you think you can't do it for his whole life. And that's how he became the best race car driver there was. Right? But eventually that asset, that mentality that helped you get to your peak performance is not maintainable and becomes your Achilles heel. And so the movie Through the Eyes of a Psychologist is a perfect example of what can happen when we're at peak performance, but we're not at a maintainable level mentally. And so what happens to Ricky Bobby? He has a panic attack.
Right.
He thinks he's on fire.
Right.
He develops neurological symptoms or conversion disorder. He's fake paralyzed, right? And then he has to go through this introspective experience of learning, like when his dad says, like, hell, Ricky, I was high when I said that. You could be second or third. Like, oh my gosh, like I don't have to be first. And as that pressure is removed, and he does exposure therapy. He sits in his car with the leopard or whatever it is, and learns to drive with fear rather than trying to force fear out. And all of a sudden, he's able to regain, his performance. And so the movie Through the Eyes of a Psychologist is a perfect example. It's also a funny way for my clients to
I love
look
that
at
movie.
it.
That's one of my favorite all-time movies. Do you think a performance psychologist helped put the story together? Because it sounds like it.
I have no
the
idea.
way you explain it.
I have no idea, but like in my mind, I have this like concept of like teaching a class at UCLA and having Will Ferrell come co-teach it with me, and like using the movie to teach people about the mind and to teach about how it can interfere with our performance and how our asset can become our Achilles heel. So I guess the answer to the question is people still have that voice on their shoulder. A lot of times we're able to push through it, but eventually over time, by forcing it away, it comes back and kicks us in the butt.
Right. So it's almost like you have to keep evolving. The thinking that got you there isn't going to be the thinking that's going to keep you there or keep you growing once you hit another level.
Exactly.
Interesting.
No. Exactly.
So you mentioned one of the first things you have them do is watch this movie, but also what else do you have them do? So like if I came to you and I said, look, I'm a physician. I have this really high stress life. I have all this stuff going on. I just keep feeling like, am I going to make it? Am I going to be able to do this? How would you kind of handle that with someone like myself or even an athlete that kind of having similar issues in his?
Great question.
Yeah.
So the first thing I do is set the record straight of what we can't do. So a lot of my spiel with my clients is about expectations versus reality. And I literally draw a curve out. And if the expectations are way above reality, that's stress because that's something we can't reach. So I say we have to like gradually increase expectations, increase reach. And so I like to set the expectations from the start, which is there's no magic button. There's no magic coping skill. There's no magic strategy that's going to take away your stress. It's not going to happen. And so that is first and foremost. And then I start, if my clients are ready for it, and most of them are, I start away from how do we eliminate something immediately. There's no magic button. And I start with the question of why. Why do you do what you do? And I have my clients go home with a list. It's from a book called The Confidence Gap, the value worksheet. And I have them go home and look at 58 different value words and figure out, why am I doing what I'm doing? What drives me to do this? Right. And these value words are things that eventually we strive for, but can never be achieved. Right. How do you check the box off that you've achieved challenge or perseverance or spirituality? Right. You can check the box off like got MD, like opened a new healthcare system. Right? You can check those boxes off. But if you're only living to check boxes, eventually you'll be overwhelmed and stressed and feel unfulfilled. And if we feel overwhelmed and stressed and unfulfilled, then we can't continuously perform well. So I start with setting expectations, especially what's not going to happen. And then we look into the why. And then once we formulate that why, that North Star, then we kind of work backwards and say, okay, how do we make decisions and actions in our life that are in line with that why? Because when we feel stressed or overwhelmed, it's typically because we're out of alignment with that North Star. And then we work all the way down to, okay, now what kind of skills can we develop that can help us pursue that why and also reduce stress along the way?
Interesting. And so this is I'm sure this is more than just one visit, right? I'm sure it's occurring over time.
That's part about expectations too. This isn't a one and done kind of thing. This isn't get a shot, no stress, go home.
Right.
It's kind of like losing weight, right? Like it's a lot of times it takes a few months, years even to put on weight. And then one day you wake up and you're like, oh no, like I'm overweight and not where I want to be. And then you instantly want to lose weight. But it takes a while, and it takes behaviors, and it takes modification strategies, and it takes a mindset to gradually lose weight. And so oftentimes, like Ricky Bobby, right, he has 40 some odd or 35 some odd years, however old he is in the movie, of building up this mindset that we now have to break down and reformulate. And so it's kind of like losing weight or gaining muscle, right? It takes a while to get where you want to be, and then it takes maintenance.
Right.
It doesn't just stop.
Well, wow. So another question I had for you is, say someone comes in, basketball player, for example, loses the game, last few seconds of the game. And I'm sure you see some of these acute situations where people come in where they failed and they want to understand the psychology of what's going on there. What do you kind of tell those people? So
I think failure is part of especially athletic experience, right? If you haven't failed in athletics, then you haven't tried.
Right.
Okay. So failure is part of the experience. And so removing failure is an unrealistic option and is not possible. So what I hope for my clients is that they start to be able to experience that failure and then not carry it with them in a negative way. So to remove athletics from the equation, I work sometimes with pain and headaches, and people get migraines. So there's a difference between the individual who gets a migraine on a Tuesday. It's like, okay, this stinks. This is really unpleasant, right? I had a dark room, all that. And then wakes up on Wednesday and kind of shakes off the cobwebs and goes about their day. That's very different from the person who gets a migraine on a Tuesday, same thing, and wakes up Wednesday and goes, that was so terrible. What if it happens again? Like, oh my gosh.
I wasted my whole day.
I wasted my whole day yesterday. Like, what if that happens today? Maybe I shouldn't do something then, because if it happens, then I'll be knocked out again. And all of a sudden they've lost Wednesday.
Right.
Or Thursday, and then Friday. And same with athletes. If we fail, right, it hurts. We have to process that hurt. We can't fake like it doesn't hurt, but we have to train our brain to learn from that experience and not carry it forward with us so it doesn't impact our future performance. So when I work with my clients, I tell them this, and I say, I don't mean to be mean, but while we're working together, I kind of hope you get punched in the gut. Like, I kind of hope we have an experience that's negative, so that we can put our skills to the test.
Right.
Can we process and move forward without carrying that baggage with us? And so when something happens in someone's life, as unfortunate as that is, it's very helpful from working with them perspective of, okay, we've practiced for this. We've reviewed this. Now, how do we move forward?
I see. Okay, so we got moving forward from failure. We also have being realistic and setting realistic expectations of yourself. Give us a couple of other strategies.
So when it comes to turning the guy down, right, turn the volume down on our shoulder, I think there's, and this kind of the new wave of CBT, of cognitive behavioral therapy, called acceptance and commitment therapy.
Can I just interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Because I think CBT is extremely important for our audience to understand. It's used for a lot of different things, for insomniacs, for example, et cetera. And I always get asked the question, like, what is CBT?
Sure.
So I'd love to get your, professor of neuroscience explanation of that, so everyone really gets it.
I think that'll lead good into the, into the conversation.
Right.
So most people understand therapy from what they see in the media, right? So you see like Tony Soprano, like laying on the couch, like talking about his mom. Right. Like that's what most people kind of think of as.
Is that not what actually happens?
It's not what happens. I don't even have a couch in my office. Okay. So cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is about helping my clients understand the relationship between how they think, that internal dialogue that they have, and how that relates to how they feel. And that's not just emotionally, that's also physically. And then what their actions or behaviors are as a result. So the simplest version of this, I use this example with my clients, is you're sitting at a red light in your car, there's one car in front of you, the light turns green. The guy in front of you does not go. And your thought is, what a jerk, doesn't he know I have places to be? How could he be so inconsiderate? And that's our internal dialogue. Right. And then what do? We feel tension in our body. We may feel frustrated or angry. And then what's our action? We honk, we flick the guy off, we drive really fast and speed around him, right? Yeah. So the situation there, right, is related to the thought process.
Sure.
Imagine the exact same situation now, sitting at the red light, and the thought, guy doesn't go, and the thought is, he's probably on his phone. I've been there, right? Totally done that myself. Now we don't feel as tense. We don't feel that frustration or that anger, and we don't honk. The action in this case is inaction. And so the exact same situation, but depending on how our brain interprets it and views it, can modify our physical and emotional experience and our actions. So that's CBT in a nutshell.
Amazing. Love it. Love the explanation. So how does it tie into what we're talking about?
So the next kind of wave of CBT, which is called acceptance and commitment therapy, is kind of like whole milk and skim milk. Like it's all dairy products, but just slightly different terminology, is more about when those thoughts, as we kind of coming back to the beginning, are real, are rational, and it's hard to just change them in response to a situation. How do we start to accept them and divorce ourselves from their power? And so if I have a student and in front of me, I say, think about failing your test on Friday. And as they think about it, they feel bad. So their body and their mind is reacting as if in that moment they are failing the test, even though they're not. And so in that case, we call it cognitive fusion, or getting hooked on your thoughts. Okay. You're literally drinking in your thoughts. Right. So some of the exercises we do are diffusion or unhooking techniques, which is how do we start to view our thoughts, as abstract as this sounds, as just words. They're just letters that are in combination in our brain. And so one of the analogies I say is, imagine you have a glass of water, and in this water are all of the unwanted thoughts or feelings that you have. Like, I'm no good, I'm going to fail, or I'm anxious, I'm frustrated, I'm stressed out. What if I screw up? Yeah. Those are all in this glass of water. And we have two options. We can take a big swig and drink it in, and that's taking our thoughts literally, and then we feel all the things that they're associated with. Or we can observe them, and we can look at them and say, oh, look, I noticed that there's a thought floating in there that I might screw up. Or I noticed that I could fail the test. Or I noticed that there's some anxiety floating at the top there. And so I had a patient describe it once as, we become the doctor. We clinically evaluate them and recognize that they're just words.
Right.
Now, it takes practice. Yeah. And some people pick up on it pretty quickly. And some people need me to use 1,000 analogies before they're able to digest it. But that's essentially the nuts and bolts of the process, is removing, unhooking ourselves from that train of thoughts that can get off the tracks.
It sounds similar to meditation. Right?
There's a big mindfulness component to it. I do mindfulness techniques in regards to how we think. So being mindful of our thoughts and mindful when we're taking a sip. And to use a sports analogy, right? It's not about getting in the zone, which is really hard, and psychologists really haven't figured out the right way to do that. Yeah. It's about recognizing when we're really out of the zone and being able to snap back in quicker, right? versus you're on the free throw line and you're going, oh my gosh, if I miss this shot, we're going to lose. And if we lose, like, oh my girlfriend's going to dump me and coach is going to bench me. My parents are going to disown me, and you still got to shoot the ball.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, we may not be able to stop that initial thought, because if I miss this shot, we lose. It's true. If it's the last, if there's 1 second on the clock and you're down, when you're down one. So it's more about going, oh man, if I miss the shot, we lose. Okay. Pause. My mind just got hooked. My mind just took me to negative town. Okay. Thanks, brain, for that distraction. Back to focusing on my form, on my free throw.
Interesting. Yeah, I love it. It's like meditation, but doing it like live in the moment, immediately, being mindful of your thoughts, divorcing yourself from that thought, and then getting back to the task at hand.
Yeah.
Pretty cool stuff. Pretty neat. Go ahead. Do you have a question?
I was going to say, how much of this comes back to childhood, and how much reprogramming do you do? Or I feel so often. I mean, that's always seems to be the conversation of being a product of your environment and the upbringing, and how much do you see that coming into play?
All the time.
Yeah.
I like to tell my clients I work in the present, but we have to respect the past. And we have to understand it. We're not going to go back and again lay on the couch and Freudian psychoanalysis your relationship with your mother when you were 2. We're not going to do that. But it's important for my clients to understand, get back to the why. Why is my brain have a tendency to do X? Right? So if you look at Ricky Bobby example, right? Remember his dad left him when he was younger, and his whole reason why was to prove that he was valuable to his father. Right? So that's important to understand when it comes to taking the next step in the present about how to move forward. And so understanding someone's development and understanding how they were raised and what their friendships were like and where some of these automatic rules and thought processes come from. So a lot of my male clients, there's stereotypically, but it's true, there's an automatic kind of assumption or rule internally of I shouldn't express emotion because therefore I won't be a man. Right? So those thoughts come from our development and how we were raised, society, coaches, parents, teams, whatever. And so it's important to understand where they come from so then we can move forward in the present despite them.
Right. So we have a lot of clients at Next Health that are super high performance. They want to do everything for their body and mind that they can do so that they can just go at it every single day and not feel the effects of physical and cognitive slowdown, right? So that's your clientele as well, right? And I'm sure you also pack in other strategies as well, kind of peripherally as to what you do as well that work or that help people, or in what you do as well. So besides this cognitive behavioral therapy, what other strategies are you giving them?
So a lot of it, again, comes from the clinical world that we then translate into performance.
Got it.
And so exposure therapy, right, is designed to help people get over fears. So if you have a fear of heights, we gradually expose you to heights, right? You look at the elevator and you hang out there for a while. And then you get in the elevator and then you hang out there for a while. And then you press 1 on the elevator and you hang out there for a while. And your brain finally gradually realizes that the scary thing at the bottom of our core beliefs or core fears isn't true, right? Awesome. I'm going to die. That's not going to happen. And so get in the elevator, right?
Right.
So when it comes to performance situations, I like to tell all my clients, I have to do a downward arrow exercise, which is, what is causing us stress at the top? Right? Or what is something that we're hesitant to do, right? And then I why it out with them. Why? Why are you so stressed about that? Well, why are you stressed about that? Well, then what if that bad thing did happen? What if that bad thing did happen? And we kind of go all the way down. And the dirty secret is at the bottom of everybody's arrow is the same things. I'm afraid of failure. I don't want to be a failure. I don't want to be worthless. And I don't want to be unloved.
Right.
And so once we understand that, then we can work our way back up the arrow and identify scientific tests. And we can say, okay, so you are worried that if you do X, Y will happen. Let's do X. And maybe we start X gradually. And so one of two things happens. We learn that Y does not happen, right? Or we learn that Y happens and we can cope with it when it does. And I think that is more where my peak performers lie.
That's huge.
It's more of when something doesn't go well, when I don't succeed, right? Could I cope with it?
Right.
And so that keeps us from taking the next step. from making that extra call, reaching out to that one extra person to seal the deal, because you're like, what if they say no?
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, they might.
Yeah.
Right? So then how do I cope and not have that then affect me the next day or the next phone call and that kind of thing?
Right. Huh. Really interesting.
Yeah.
So of course, I talk to people all the time, and I find that even with health, this becomes an issue. Like people trying to get healthy, and they have this person telling them on their shoulder they're never going to get healthy. So it's interesting to go down the whys of that. Like, why do you think you can't get healthy, et cetera, et cetera? It works for a lot of different things, I think.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Without
I mean,
doubt.
and health is, I think, a major part of what I do, especially with some of my injury recovery work. But it's about identifying the two whys. Why do you want to get healthy? Number one. And number two, why are you not? Right? What is in your way of getting healthy?
Right.
And once we put more concrete information to that, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's super abstract. We can't work with it's hard.
Right.
Like, why is it hard? Okay. Well, because I can't A, B, C, or D. Okay. So A, what's keeping you from doing A? Okay. So now we can remove that mental obstacle to A, because we've actually defined it, we've identified it, and we've identified a solution to attack it.
Got it. Awesome. I'm going to try that on my wife tonight.
Don't do that.
Go for it.
Don't do that. I won't be any part of that.
I have a question for both of you guys, actually. Great opportunity with the two doctors here to, from different angles, talking about stress, right? I mean, a lot of what you're talking about is stress. A lot of what we do here with Next Health, with health optimization, and thinking from my perspective, I do so much for health and to try to be in a state of peak performance and, taking advantage of the services that we do at Next Health. And I feel like I'm doing so much, but the one thing that probably my biggest negative is probably a level of stress with, running and maintaining a business, which is, it's a challenge, of course. And I always think to myself, am I defeating the purpose of everything I'm investing into my body? I'm getting sleep. I'm working out, I'm doing stem cells, I'm doing IVs, I'm doing NAD, hormone replacement therapy, all of these things, but yet my stress level is probably significantly high. What is your guys' opinion from a mental health standpoint, from a health optimization standpoint of, the balance there?
Yeah. I'll answer a few questions, and then I really want to dive into that with you, because I want to hear from what you have to say. But, for me, of course, stress, we just have to accept, first of all, that stress is a normal part of life. Everyone's going to be stressed, especially in this modern day environment. There's very few people I meet on a day-to-day level that are not stressed. And if they're not stressed, they're smoking something a lot of times, right? So it's hard to avoid stress. So I think acceptance of stress in your life is key. But I think that the detrimental effect of stress comes when you have this physical reaction to stress inside of you, right? So that stress turns into your heart rate goes up. You feel like you can't take a deep breath so that you don't. And you just kind of get paralyzed and don't exercise, et cetera, et cetera. And those are the actions. You don't go to the gym, the inaction, like you were saying. So I think letting the stress affect you on a physiological level is where you have to, first of all, notice that that's happening and then short circuit that in some way. My advice to people on the easiest technique that I found to short circuit that stress leading to physiological change is to create breaks in the stress. And by that, I mean, if you're working for an hour, make sure you have a timer or something set that in 45 minutes, you stop and you get up, get away from the computer and take a 10-minute break, even a 5-minute break. Do something every 45 minutes, Pomodoro technique kind of thing, Every week, a day of self-care. Every month, a weekend away completely from whatever's stressing you. Every quarter, maybe a few more days away, a long weekend. Every year, a couple of vacations. It's important to do this to break up the stress. And if you break up the stress, then you learn to manage it better, and you'll kind of lose stress's physiological power over you. And I love what you're saying about the cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of doing that almost on an instant by instant basis. Right. Which is something like from what you're telling me, I'm going to see if I can incorporate a little bit more of that into my life and thoughts and my mindfulness practice. So that's my one piece of advice, but let's get your take.
Sure. I love what you said about the acceptance of stress.
Yeah.
So I think, and I'm going to kind of translate that into the perception of stress. So when I work with my clients, and a lot of them are stressed, whatever that word means to them. And one of my biggest questions to them is, what does that word mean to you? And is it actually a bad thing? And so it becomes a bad thing when it keeps us from doing what we want to do, or if it jacks up our fight or flight system and physiologically activates us and we don't have a reset button and we never recover from that, because then we get all kinds of chronic challenges that can happen and eventually we burn out. So a lot of people that I work with, the perception of their stress level is higher than their stress actually is. And a lot of that comes from this idea that I shouldn't be this stressed, right? The acceptance piece. I shouldn't have this much stress, therefore something's wrong. That stresses me out and now I have extra stress.
Right.
So I think understanding where and how helpful or unhelpful that stress is in the moment is really helpful. Sometimes that comes from insight and just sort of taking a moment to kind of self-check. And sometimes it comes from working with someone like myself. Some of my clients meet with me once or twice. I'm like, dude, you're good. Like, I don't know what you're worrying about right now. Like, everything's okay. like you're good. We can work on improving other stuff, but like your stress level is not unhealthy. The second piece, and to go to the breaks, is a lot of my peak performers are programmed, if you will, right, with that all or nothing Ricky Bobby mentality. If you're not first, you're last. So it's go, go, go. So it's making sure I'm hitting the gym every single day. It's making sure I'm writing those emails instantly when they come in. I'm doing all these things perfectly. But over time, that leads to burnout. And a lot of my endurance athletes have this problem. They're afraid if they stop training for a day, if they take a break, then all of a sudden their training goes to crap.
Right.
And they're not going to be able to perform. And we know with endurance athletes, like, you need to let your body recover, right? And that's physically, but also mentally. You're draining yourself. So to my business professionals that are go, 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 right? I don't want to stop them, but we need to start helping them understand, again, coming back to that why. Why is it important to take that 10-minute break? And if my clients don't digest the why, then they will not take the break. They will not take a moment to empty. I use a stress trash can example that we carry around all day. They won't empty any trash out, and then they only notice it when it's too full, and then it's too late. So I have some really high performing clients that get panic attacks. And a panic attack is basically your body going, take a break, dude. Like, you're overwhelmed here, man. And so like, it's your body's alarm system. Or they get GI distress, right? Or they get tension headaches, and that's our body physically telling us, chill. You need to chill. And it catches up to us.
Tension headaches all the time. It's the worst.
I get them every now and then, and it's in my jaw. And it's usually when I'm writing neuropsych reports, because I don't like them. And they take a long time. And I have to take a break. And I know that's my cue. Okay, my stress is hitting an unhelpful level right now. But the real key is, and this is why I like working with individuals, is figuring out, and coming back to the value statement, right? My challenge, like, I like helping people. That's my, like, the surface level reason why I do what I do. My core value is challenge. And so helping somebody who doesn't see the point of taking a break to make themselves even more productive is a challenge. It's really hard to do, right? And so to me, that's intriguing and that's exciting. And so I really enjoy that process of helping my peak performers, who undoubtedly think they know everything, right? Figure out a way to access them at a place where they can recognize, oh yeah, like, that is important for me to do. And that will help me move forward. So it's like taking a break to be able to accelerate versus like always going kind of fast.
Right. Kind of along the same lines, a lot of people ask me or us how to get into a flow state or maintain a flow state. I hear this terminology a lot now, and I want to get your take on flow states and some techniques you might have to maintain or create one.
This is a reality check.
Right.
We can't purposefully enter into a flow state. In fact, the more we try, the less we will be in a flow state.
Right.
And so to come back to our conversation earlier about sort of recognizing when we're distracted,
right.
That's really the key, is how do we recognize when we're getting hooked off of the present and then come back to the present and work cognitively efficiently. The more we get frustrated that we got hooked and pulled out of the present will keep us even out of the present longer. So there's a lot of research on flow, and there's no technique, there's no secret sauce to it. And it's one of these sort of abstract fallacies that people hold on to that then keeps them from actually performing their best and from actually getting into flow state, if you will.
Keep thinking why am I not in flow state?
Yeah. And if you're thinking, why am I not in flow state? Then you can't actually be paying attention to the email you're supposed to be writing or the report you're writing or the patient you're working with. Because your mind is distracted with its thoughts.
Right.
I'd be interesting to hear how you define flow state from your perspective.
So I think the flow state is described by a lot of people, right? We've probably all experienced it at some point. Is when kind of time stands still and we're not thinking.
Right.
And I think there's no way of really knowing this, right? But my theory is that we're not thinking. We're just shining the spotlight so fully on the present that we're unaware of our thoughts. And so like Buddhist monks they meditate and they focus on their breath or an image or a mantra or an om. And the idea is to spend as much time focusing on that specific entity, whether it's an om or a physical sensation. And every time your mind gets pulled out to come back to it.
Right.
And so when we're in a flow state, that seems to just kind of happen. Now, it doesn't mean our mind isn't still active in the background.
Right.
It just means like
we're just hyper focused here.
Exactly. It's like there's a stage show analogy that's used. That's kind of like our life's like a stage show. And on the stage are all the different thoughts and feelings and memories and sensations, physical sensations that we have. And we have the ability to step back and look at them all or to hyper focus on one. And when we're not productive, we hyper focus on negative thoughts or negative emotions. They still exist when we're focusing on the other things. We're just not as influenced by them because we're not focusing on them.
Got it. So what are your top tips that you've identified? Not even necessarily top tips, but like what are the traits that you've noticed with all these high performing athletes and business leaders? What are the couple characteristics that you've identified that are the commonalities through the majority of them?
If you're not first, you're last.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think that's it. And I think the reason why I think
So it's funny because that's kind of a double-edged,
That's
clearly
a double-edged sword,
good,
right?
Yeah.
Right? But that's also the Achilles heel at the same time.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on that? I mean,
so-
do you want to get rid of that then?
No.
Okay.
And I think that's where a lot of my clients that I see have struggled if they have seen another psychologist. And again, I don't want to put down other psychologists, and traditional cognitive behavioral theory is about, that's considered all or nothing thinking, which in cognitive behavioral therapy is called a cognitive distortion, which is essentially a maladaptive or unhelpful way of thinking, right? So if I try to take that away from my client and tell him that all or nothing thinking is bad, first of all, they're not going to come back and see me. And second of all, I don't want to do that because that's gotten them to be where they are. That's the chip on their shoulder. That's I have something to prove. And so I don't want to remove that at all. What I want them to do is start to become more cognizant of when is it accidentally or unintentionally hurting me and keeping me from doing the all or nothing thing that I want to be
kind
doing.
of taking more control of it. It almost seems like until that point, it kind of controls them and it drives them, but you're able to teach them how to harness it and have more control over it, use it as a tool and a vehicle to then get to the next level.
Yep. And I think a lot of times what I see in my peak performers is in the business and sports setting, it's really helpful. In the social or relationship setting, not as much. Right? All right. And so there's a perfect example of how this amazing trait that got them to be, the startup, right? That's chugging on all cylinders, the MVP of their team, right? This is a great asset that they have that's just crumbling their relationships, right? And so in that case, Achilles heel, right? So then it's about becoming aware of when that thought process is controlling you, right? And I like that word harness, and harnessing the power of it and recognizing when can I actually turn this off and I'll still be okay and I'll still be able to perform. And this situation, for example, may require less of that.
Wow. So you were mentioning a little bit to me earlier about some new technology that you're developing that could potentially help masses of people get the benefit of someone like yourself. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to be a little coy because we're still coming out with it. But so my business partner is a sports neurologist, also at UCLA. We met on fellowship, and like you guys, we've even though we were just on fellowship, we were like we're going to burn out if we do this, right? Sure. And so we've been trying to figure out how can we help people before they come into our clinic. right? And so there's a lot of apps and technology out there for mindfulness and for exercise and for breathing strategies and even for cognitive training like Luminosity and such.
True.
So we've created a program that combines physical exercise, cognitive exercise, and mindfulness. With the idea being it's a true full body workout.
Yeah.
So we're physically getting more healthy, we're mentally getting sharper, and we're starting to learn more about where our thoughts go and how can we refocus. And there's actual science behind it. Like, we haven't run our program specifically through a clinical trial, but you guys are probably well aware, exercise is good for your brain. Right? We've known
Definitely
that.
works. Right. Don't need a clinical trial for that.
Yeah, we've known that for decades, right? But interestingly, in the last few years, 10, 15 years, which in research standpoints is pretty new, I realized that if you exercise and train your brain, do cognitive exercises, memories at the same time, there's an additive effect.
Right.
So your brain is in a primed learning state when you're exercising, which is why a lot of things like Luminosity haven't shown that great of data. You get better at the game, but you're kind of sedentary, you're sitting there, and there's a lot of placebo effects going on and such. So we're trying to harness the power of exercise and use that as a way to tap into cognitive training and get some more additive benefits from it, and slide into mindfulness component too.
Yeah.
And we've got some potential future looks at nutrition and maybe more of a sports psychology approach as well. But we're sticking right now just to the pure brain and body fitness.
Interesting. I love that. Yeah. When I'm at the gym, I try to listen to a podcast versus music because I just feel like I absorb it so much better. And then for me, another big thing I like to use is a walking desk, not only because it keeps my activity going, but I feel like just the increased movement, I'm able to work more efficiently and stay more focused. So kind of building on that, like, this sounds like you're tying those things together: exercise, brain development, and mindfulness, which what's it going to be called? You can't tell us yet. How do we download it?
So it's called ARA-Train, ARA-Train, ARA-Train. And it's like kind of a play on the Greek concept of arete, which is like achieving like completeness and fullness of mind and body, like being the best version of yourself. We had some trademark issues with that word, so we made up our own word. So hopefully we'll see a beta version out in the next 2 to 4 months. We're in development right now. We've got kind of our basic puzzle pieces into it. And I think the secondary gain so we have this like scientific backing of like brain and body training works. It's helpful. There's your brain's in a prime learning state. But inherently what we're also doing is we're training your brain to work while you're fatigued.
Sure.
Because we're tiring you out. You're exercising. Right. You're still going to have to pay attention, focus, use your memory, use your attention, multitask, and those kind of things. So it's kind of a double prong approach. And so we're hoping that people can really see the benefit of that. Like at the end of a day, or if I got a bad night's sleep, like how can I, summon the cognitive strength now that I've trained myself to do when I've been tired to still at least perform better than I was before, even if it's not super optimally.
Very cool. Great. Wow. You've given us a lot to think about. I know, you've given me at least a couple things I'm going to start trying today. And I'm interested in continuing the conversation with you for sure. Can't wait till the program comes out and use that as well. Do you have any more questions for him?
Where can people find you?
Yeah.
So I have a website, www.polsterperformance.com.
And that's
Polster, performance.com. That's just a little bit of information about me. My email's on there, my contact's on there. I am on social media, Dr. Doug Polster, Dr. Doug Polster on Instagram. I am terrible at Instagram. And it's one of these things that I battle with mentally. Like, I know business-wise I have to do this, but it causes me so much stress and frustration. So I'm like, do I practice what I preach? Do I try to be a better business person? I'm just not.
How does that make you feel? Why do you feel that way?
You
Why don't you lay on the couch over here?
I know. I have to take my own medicine sometimes.
I absolutely know what you mean. Right?
Yeah, it's tough. And so I'm not a marketing guy at all. So the self-promotion piece is kind of hard. But yeah, so you can find me on my website. And if any of the listeners have questions, or they're local to LA and are interested in sort of working with me and learning more about my services, I do free consults, 15-minute consults on the phone just to see if it's right for them. And then the ARA-Train program will be coming out in the next 2 to 4 months. And we're doing pop-ups around LA right now with a very super beta version with just like mats that have like shapes and numbers and things on them, so we can activate your memory. And we do like a full like HIIT training, like a full 40-minute body weight exercise
Very
training.
cool.
So maybe we'll demo it here one day, or
That'd be
we're
great.
kind of popping up
Amazing.
across the LA area.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Can't wait to see you and work with you more. And we look forward to everything that you have coming out.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me. It was awesome.